Hello, I'm David McKie, Deputy Managing Editor of Canada's National Observer. Thanks for joining us today from the Zoom world. I'm at COP15, the Biodiversity Conference in Montreal, with Canada's Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault.
Morning, David.
UN Commissioner of Environment, Virginijus Sinkevičius. Welcome.
Morning.
Hello to you both. Now, I'll give you some bio information about these two gentlemen joining me. Stephen Guilbeault calls himself a radical pragmatist.
Someone called me like that. I don't, but a friend of mine did.
So someone called Stephen Guilbeault a radical pragmatist, which has made its rounds in media reports, which aptly describes, but I think it absolutely aptly describes your past as an environmental activist, and you are presently Canada's Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Son of a butcher from Latuc, Quebec. His environmental activism started at the age of 5 when he squatted in a tree to prevent the clear cut of a beloved forest behind his home. He co-founded Equiterre, I remember those days, now the largest environmental organization in Quebec. Many people might know him from the time he scaled the CN Tower in Toronto to push the federal government to commit to more ambitious climate goals. He's now Canada's Environment Minister for just over a year. This past spring, Minister Guilbeault released the Emissions Reduction Plan, the first time Canada has had a comprehensive plan to cut carbon emissions that will be reviewed annually. Virginijus Sinkevičius is the Minister of Economy in the Lithuanian government before becoming just the age of 28. So 28. That's very young. The UN Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries in 2019. He was team leader for regulatory affairs at Invest Lithuania. He holds a BA in International Relations and a Master's in European International Affairs. Commissioner Sinkevičius' mandate is to ensure the environment, oceans and fisheries remain at the core of the European Green Deal, as well as leading on the Circular Economy Action Plan to promote the use of sustainable resources. Now, I'm going to ask you, Commissioner, about the European Green Deal in a sec, but first I wanted to ask you and Minister Guilbeault why you felt the need to create a partnership on some of the big issues facing the world. And I'll start with you, Commissioner.
So I think, first of all, the issues that we are facing, the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution, that cannot be tackled by a city, by a country, and even by a region. So you need for that a global effort, because these issues, they are not only transboundary, but they are so deep and so wide that they require a global effort. So I think it's been always great to meet Minister. First time we've met at G7 in Berlin, and already then we spoke about those like-minded ideas on which we can build our partnership across the Atlantic Ocean. So today we are in a crucial moment for our planet. Finally, after 2 years, and I'm extremely thankful to Canada, to Minister for his leadership, for hosting CBD COP15, because we today discussing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So we are 2 years behind the implementation, and we still have no deal on our hands. But the moment is here. I'm very happy to be in Montreal. I hope that we won't let down the citizens of Montreal, but also people in the world, because they're all waiting for an ambitious outcome where we will find a ways to commit and ensure that by 2030 we not only protect and restore the natural ecosystems, but we also ensure that local communities are on board for this solution, that they also can enjoy the benefits of the economic growth, and that we halt the biodiversity loss, which is done by us, by the human beings.
Ambitious outcome. Agreed?
Oh, absolutely. And I really want to thank the Commissioner. I mean, as an environmental activist, I was such a big fan of the European Union in international forums. They've been a positive force for change, pushing the envelope, pushing countries to do more. And frankly, if the COP is being held here in Montreal, it is in part because of you. When countries started realizing that it wouldn't be able to hold it in China, and the Chinese, in fact, said that we don't think we can do it this year. The Commissioner was one of the first one to say, okay, well, maybe what about doing it in Canada? and everything else is history, I suppose. But it's a great collaboration to be able to work with the European Union and the Commission the way we have. Together with many other countries, we launched the High Ambition Coalition for People in Nature, and we started about 35 countries back in September. And now there's more than 120 countries who believe that here in Montreal, we need to leave with an agreement where we will agree to protect at least 30% of lands and oceans by 2030. That we need to do more in terms of restoration of nature, that we need to mobilize resources. Countries in the north need to mobilize resources to help and work with our partners in the south to help them contribute to nature protection. So we really see eye to eye.
I want to stay with you, Minister. What can you accomplish together that you couldn't on your own?
Well, as the Commissioner said, climate change, nature loss, fighting pollution, these are issues that are too big for any single country. And I'm having similar conversation with China. China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas in the world, second largest economy. They can't do it on their own, and we need to be able to work together. We need to find solutions to complicated and complex problems, but in a way, I suppose in a good way, we are condemned to be able to find solutions together, because these problems are just too big for any single country or region, as the Commissioner said, to tackle on its own.
Commissioner, do you want to pick up on that?
I think, so first of all, today we are, of course, going to be pushing forward, I think, the ambitious agenda of the COP15 outcome. And of course, we count a lot on Canada as sort of co-host leadership here, and the role is going to be important, and you will support Canada in this endeavor to finding the agreement which again can bring the global south on board, which I think they very openly said that they are supportive, but they need means to implement. So we need to hear that call and craft the financial mechanism in the way that it would be accessible, that would allow them to implement the change on the ground. And as I said, in many of those areas that we seek to protect, the most biodiverse places on Earth, we still have, indigenous people living, and they have to be also part of the solution. But, the work doesn't end at COP15. I hope that we will be able to achieve and walk out of the room just before Christmas with ambitious agreement. But then we will very soon meet and talk through the agreement, the global agreement on plastics, which is also crucially going to be important. And we have a narrowing window of opportunity, just about 2 years, where basically countries at UNEA agreed to have an agreement on plastic pollution. But that's not going to be an easy task also to finalize. So I really count on partnership with Canada, because I think here we again are very like-minded countries where we can facilitate such a global agreement.
That's about the second time you've mentioned the term ambitious. Are you holding out hope?
No, absolutely. Without ambition, I think in environmental policy, you cannot do anything. Everything has to have an ambition. So you always know basically where you kind of need to be, but you need to push a little bit more. And that's probably that a little push more is called ambition, because what we get from the scientific report, what we see, what we read, the situation is getting worse by day. And we cannot be fooled by that. And the situation is not easy. The background, as a former Minister of Economy, I also realized very well what's going on the ground. So at first we had a COVID-19 for 2 years, which, our citizens suffered enormously. Our economies were hit hard. And now you have war in Europe. So all that puts enormous economic pressures on our societies, on our businesses. So this is not the easiest background where you basically discussing such an agreement. But we should not be fooled that, we were lucky to have vaccines. At some point, and I hope as soon as possible, we're going to have a peace treaty. But you won't have vaccine or a peace treaty with the loss of biodiversity, with the climate change issues. You have to act. So therefore, that word ambitious is extremely important always to top up what is possible and then a bit more.
what would threaten that ambition over the next few days? Like, what should we be looking for, Minister?
Like the Commissioner, I'm very optimistic. And especially now that ministers have started to arrive, I think it's going to help shift gears in terms of the speed of negotiations. I mean, if we can't come to an agreement, which I don't think will be the case, it will be because of lack of political will. And I would like to think that there's enough political will here in Montreal to make that ambitious agreement happen.
So when we talk about political will, how does the partnership with work between the Canadians and the Europeans? Because there is political will there.
It's a very easy partnership. we text each other on WhatsApp regularly about different issues, and of course, sometimes we have disagreement. We see things differently, but ultimately our goals are very aligned, and our values are very aligned. When it comes to environmental issues, to human rights issues, to the participation of civil society in these types of form, we really see eye to eye on so many different things.
What do you disagree on?
Small things, really. Sometimes, tactics. Should we do this now or wait a little bit? But they're very, very small disagreements.
I mean, it's important to talk about disagreements because that's how you move forward, right? I mean, we all agree and we disagree on things. So.
Oh, but I think it's very difficult probably to frame it into a word disagreement because more it's probably based on what you see on the ground and actors you engage. And let's not forget that the EU is 27 member states as well. So for me to act and make a move, I have to have an agreement with 27 member states, and that's not always the easiest case. Even so, I think we always have extremely fruitful discussion, and member states. They put a very important arguments on the table. But, for example, Minister, he wants to move forward with certain ambition, with certain points, because if you look at the negotiations that are ongoing today, we still have a lot of text in brackets. So, of course, you have to streamline certain work and move forward.
So
how do Canadians benefit from this partnership?
In so many different ways. The European Union tends to be at the forefront of environmental regulations on so many different things, and often when we want to see how can we do better in Canada, we look at what Europe is doing and say, oh, they're doing this. We should be doing that on plastics, on climate. I mean, you've had a price on pollution in the European Union since middle of the 2000s. We've had a price on pollution in Canada started in 2019. So we are playing catch up. I said earlier, as an environmental activist, they were an inspiration. They're still an inspiration as an environment and climate change minister. So many of the things that they do are groundbreaking and help not just us in Canada, but many other countries around the world see what can be done in terms of environmental legislation, environmental regulation, investment in clean technologies. Your new Fit by 55,
yes.
Your new plan, the European Union plans to produce 25% of their electricity from rooftop solar panels by 2030.
Wow.
Let's think about that for a minute. 25% from solar rooftop. That is amazing. So I am humbled, really, by this partnership because they're great, and the commissioner is amazing.
I wanted to circle back to the European Green Deal that I mentioned in my introduction. Now, talk to me a bit about this. So how did 27 union countries get together? I mean, we in our federation, you, Minister, would know about this, provinces and territories, getting everyone together, singing from the same proverbial hymn book is a challenge. How did you pull it off?
It's not always the easiest process, but I'm extremely proud of the Fit for 55. It's a legal obligation to reach the goal of CO2 emissions decreased by 55% by 2030. But of course, you have to always realize that member states, they come with a different perspective, with the different backgrounds, with the different stages of economic development and so on. So of course, all these has to be addressed. What is not going to fly is always, that sort of one-size-fits-all approach. So you have to craft the solutions that, you have to agree on the goal, which is, your end of the story goal, let's say. So it's decreased by 55 and then decarbonization fully to zero in 2050. And then, of course, steps within the member states. So, Just Transition Fund, it helps enormously to ensure that we still have a few regions that are coal dependent. So for them, it's not only a challenge to change the energy mix. You have a massive amount of people who work in those industries who do not really imagine doing anything else than work in the coal power plant, and they did that for generations, and they enjoyed cheap electricity, cheap heating in their housing. And so how to turn that around? So you have to put a sufficient plan for those countries that they could execute, and of course to have the citizens on board. I think the story here, the most important, is for people to feel that they are part of this transition. This transition has to be just and has to have everyone on board. Doesn't matter, you live in the south of Europe, Spain or Portugal, even the outermost regions, or you live in the northern parts or eastern parts of Europe. You have to feel that you are part of this transition and you are on board, because if you leave someone behind, that's not going to work. And then, then the usually politicians, they feel that they don't have a mandate to act and they don't land your support. So I think that was the in a nutshell, if that's possible to say, the story behind the European Green Deal. But I'm very proud. In 2019, that was the first policy to land, and it wasn't easy. Now it's probably even harder, because you have more and more voices saying that you should stop and wait with the Green Deal because we have this and that economic struggles. But if you look where our economic struggles come from, they come from our dependencies on fossil fuels. Yes. So I'm also responsible for fisheries. And this is an economic activity, which, again, extremely hard to balance with the marine protected areas, conservation measures, and etc. But the biggest problem, where this year we have our fleets losing all possibilities to be profitable and basically no point of leaving the ports, is because of the spike of fuel prices. So their dependency on fossil fuels, first of all, kills the whole business model to the whole, regions of the coastal regions of Europe. And that's very simple as that. And the answer is the European Green Deal, decarbonization of our economy. So we are not dependent on third countries that are very often not democracies, and that our economies can ensure that they have a safe production of energy. And that's only green.
What are the lessons learned for Canada in this?
Well, in some ways, on a smaller scale, there's only 38 million of us here in Canada, but the challenges are the same. We are in the process of phasing out coal from our electricity mix. We've legislated to do that by 2030. Frankly, at the rate things are going, we will get there, I'm sure, before that. But we had to go and talk to coal workers and coal communities and see with them what does a future without coal look for them? How can the federal government help both the workers and communities transition away from coal? In certain part of our countries and certain regions, coal represents 60% of the economic activities and employment in that region. So you can't just say, okay, well, we're out of coal and tough luck. As the commissioner says, you have to do this through a just transition. And we also, so we're doing it with coal. We have to do that with oil and gas, because we know that our consumption of oil and gas will be going down. If you look at the International Energy Agency's report, the IPCC report, oil consumption will go down by 2050 by at least 70%. So we have to prepare for that. Otherwise, those regions, those people, those communities will be very effective if we don't prepare the transition.
We're at COP15. Why does this matter to people? Why is this so important?
Want me to begin?
Yeah.
Okay.
They hear from me all the time.
All right. So first of all, of course, it's always, I think for human beings overall, it's always very difficult to take something what's given, what's free. And nature is free for us. And we never think about it unless maybe you are a farmer who see that your yields are going down due to droughts, or you are a fisherman or a forester seeing that something is changing, and it's exactly, and it's not there anymore for you. So very simple. World Economic Forum encountered that 50% of our world GDP is dependent on nature. If you look at Europe, 80% of our crop yields are dependent on pollination. Very simple, just bees and insects. 80%. If it's gone, there is no technology to replace it, and we would have a massive issue of food insecurity, of social, with farmers being basically out of the possibility to work and make living, and so on. But the most importantly also, if you look what is going on, the ecosystem services, they are the actually ones who are the most effectively fight climate change. I think it's always only half of the story told when people talk about climate change, and they say that going down with emissions is the most important. It's absolutely true. But if our oceans, if our soils, forests, they're not able to store those massive amounts of carbon, we are busted. There won't be technology that can replace it. There won't be carbon storage, carbon capture technology that can replace those. And then the massive issues will just go ahead. So I think it is extremely important. What we're going to achieve in this COP, going to have a massive groundwork to be done for the work which is ahead as regards the CO2 emissions, as regards the temperature and climate. So this is extremely important. I know it's a very difficult issue always to discuss, because biodiversity is much more harder word on the street than climate change. But therefore we are here. I'm very thankful again to Minister and Canada for hosting it. And I truly hope that, as I said, before Christmas we will have the best possible news for our planet and for our people.
I wanted to stay with you, Commissioner. So a big deal was made of your appointment 4 years ago at the age of 28. The first millennial to have command of an environmental portfolio. And I'm wondering, what if you could talk to us about the kind of pressures that came with, because here's a young person in a position to talk to other people his own age about a very important issue.
I think we all see the climate crisis, and we all have our reaction, and this doesn't really matter your age, because I think people want to have a livable future, if not for themselves, for their children, for their grandchildren. I think if you go around Canada and you ask people would say that they love the beauty of Canada, and they want it to be saved for generations to come. So I think this ambition is shared across generations, and European Green Deal was born out of course, very loud voice of citizens of Fridays for Future. Where in front of that movement, of course, you saw many young people. But if you look at the crowd, which was, increasing every Friday, you had more and more people with different age. And I think, being a climate activist or environmentalist, it's not about your age, it's about, what's in your heart, and that doesn't die with your age.
Minister, your appointment came with a lot of expectations as well. An activist who, became an environment minister. Talk to me a bit about that. How do you balance the pragmatism with the activism?
Well, I think the Prime Minister nominated me in this position because he wanted the activist in me to be the minister, and he wants me to be pushing on our government to do more and to do it faster. And that's what we're doing. You talked about our emissions reduction plan, first of its kind ever. In Canada, we have never in our history gave objectives to our different sectors, including the oil and gas sector. And we never did that in Canada because we were afraid to have the conversation about oil and gas needing to reduce their emissions. we're playing catch up with the European Union on regulation. So this year alone, I've either adopted or are in the process of adopting 6 different pieces of regulations to tackle plastic pollution, to tackle the emissions from the oil and gas sector, to ensure that 100% of cars sold in Canada are zero emission vehicles by 2035. So we're moving at an unprecedented rate, either in terms of investment, in terms of legislation or regulations, because unfortunately for many years not a lot of things were happening in Canada. So we are playing catch up, but we have really a good role model and inspiration to draw from.
But I mean, the expectations, it's almost as if you'll never meet the expectations that environmentalists have for you.
That's okay. That's fine. I think that their role is to continue pushing me, and they don't shy away, and I don't have to remind them or to tell them they have to do that. But I think many of them realize. Just yesterday, I got a text from an ex-colleague in the environmental movement who said, "Hey, I want to make sure you know that we know you're an activist inside government." Just out of the blue. So I think people understand that I'm working really hard and that I'm doing everything that I can to push. But that doesn't mean that they should stop pushing us and keeping our feet to the fire, because that's very important in a democracy like ours.
Well, listen, I know that the two of you have a very busy day ahead of you. Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. That's the end of our time. I want to thank EU Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevičius and Canada's Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault for joining us today. And thanks to the Zoom audience. This conversation was sponsored by Canada's National Observer in partnership with the delegation of the EU to Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.